Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I want to talk about all things paranormal and belief system oriented. I thought it would be fun to recount some of my own personal paranormal experiences and make a bit of a hashtag for the community. I love hearing other stories where strange and occult type matters are concerned, so feel free to chime in, use the hashtag that I'm going to list below. But I'll get into my own, and I'll start by prefacing with a bit on my personal, gnosis or set of beliefs and how I go about viewing these sorts of things. I would say that I am spiritually inclined. I don't subscribe to any one faith or religion or outlook. I keep a sort of healthy skepticism. I don't necessarily believe in anything wholeheartedly, but I also don't disbelieve or discount any sort of religion or spiritual idea wholeheartedly. I think there's validity in pretty much all views aside from those that are harmful or extremely dogmatic and limiting. So that being said, I was raised Roman Catholic in a very loose way, although I did go about getting baptism, communion, confirmation, those sorts of milestones and sacraments. Are those sacraments? I forget what they would be considered, but I did the whole Sunday school thing. But it was all done in a very loose and free-flowing fashion. My parents never really kept me to that, and we weren't the kind of family that went to church. But as you all will know from my videos, I am quite spiritual. I like to investigate things. I have a curious mind, and I do have a decent amount of what I would consider to be paranormal experiences, especially from my childhood. I, to some degree, question maybe not the validity, but how real these things were, or if there are explanations for what I saw that are not paranormal. That being said, I will state them as I remember them, and yeah, just take them for how you will. So I used to live in a house when I was quite young that I left when I was still relatively a young child, and a lot of the experiences take place there. I do believe that I have seen ghosts or spirits of some sort, or at least as my memory recalls it, and I constantly am questioning these memories, but I am always confronted with them. They are things that I always think about, especially on my spiritual path, and in part these experiences have made me wary of spiritual practices. So there was a sort of delay in my later, I would say early adulthood spiritual practices coming into what they are because of these paranormal experiences that I had when I was young. But I do like to think of them in a more fun storytelling way. I'm not at all averse to speaking about them, and there is a sort of healthy, I would say, detachment from these experiences, so I feel comfortable speaking to them and answering questions on them. And I'm prefacing and rambling, but in this house that I lived in when I was young, I had a room that was sort of like at a slant, kind of followed the slant of the roof. So it was an interestingly shaped room. It had a crawl space, which will come into play within the context of these stories. And the way that the room was sort of situated, my bed was on one far side, and then the side that sloped down to a very small space was on the opposite side of the room. I don't really know how to start these types of stories, and there are many stories within this space, but a lot of them happened within my room, or at least that's a focal point. But I do remember going to sleep on a lot of nights. The lights would turn out so I couldn't see the far wall, and I would see sets of eyes looking at me. I do believe that there was something within this house that was mostly the cause of, or the thing that was going on, or if there was a sort of presence. I think it was mostly within this house, because after I left this house, a lot of these things stopped happening, and I stopped seeing a lot of these things. But I would see these eyes, and I would try not to look at them, and I would often try to find ways to leave my room to go get my parents or make an excuse. My mom was actually very receptive to these stories, and she herself has quite a few paranormal experiences within this house and sees things or saw things as well. So she was very receptive to that. My dad isn't much of a believer in any sort of fashion, but he wasn't dismissive of what I had to say. And then there was my sister, who didn't really see as many things, but was very nice about when things happened. And of course, I was a young child and she's younger than me, so there wasn't much I could really corroborate to her or communicate and kind of get some feedback with. So there would be those eyes that I would see. I eventually at one point had my mom move my bed against this crawl space that was on the longer side, the side that had a taller wall where I guess we would store things. It had double doors and you would kind of have to crawl to go into it. At one point I thought I heard a voice in there telling me to come in, and it was very deep and kind of resonant, and it freaked me out. So I had my mom move my bed against that so that it couldn't be opened unless we had a few people to then move my bed to open the crawl space. So that was really interesting and fun. I remember seeing a figure in the house very often. It was sort of this shadowy man, and I would often see him as a shadow on the wall or something like that. It would usually be in the form of a silhouette, and I could tell that something about me could just tell that he was dressed in really nice clothing, sort of like a suit, and he had his hair very like slicked and like a tie, all of that sort of thing, and that he was kind of maybe in his like 30s or 40s. So I would see his shadow often in spaces. The shadow would move and would often be kind of like coming towards me or doing something that was in my direction, and it would freak me out. I don't remember actually having an encounter. Sorry, there's a bug. I'm outside and I'm not, just gonna try to get it out of the way. But I remember seeing this shadowy figure guy quite often. That was definitely a reoccurring, I guess, character presence, and I would say that was the one I was the most fearful of, although nothing inherently, I guess, like negative or overtly negative happened in connection. I wasn't hurt by that. I remember the shadowy figure. I just was creeped out by it. And on one occasion I remember seeing him behind a shower curtain and sort of reaching to open that shower curtain when I was in the bathroom. That freaked me out. And I also remember sometimes even outside of my house, if I was not away from my house for very long, if I was like in the back seat of the car at night, and you see the shadows that go across the seat as the streetlights cast shadows or the moon casts shadows, I would sometimes see him on the back of that seat, like reaching and moving. So that was really freaky. I would have a lot of weird nightmares in that house where I would wake up screaming. There were multiple nights when I was already screaming, and the screaming is what woke me up, or I woke myself up through vomiting, and that was really pleasant. I got sick a lot as a child in terms of like motion sickness and stomach sickness, so that wasn't too far off base given what I was already kind of experiencing, but that was very odd, something that I didn't at all experience once I moved. I had a lot of experiences sleepwalking that never occurred anywhere else outside of this house. So I oftentimes would sleepwalk, and I would leave pieces of my clothing or my pajamas in places. Sometimes I would sleepwalk and I would wake up in a different location. There was one occasion where I sleptwalked and went underneath my parents' bed, and I guess I continued to sleep in something. I wasn't one to sleep in. I was normally an early riser as a child, but I guess I slept in on that day, and my parents couldn't find me, and they started freaking out and tried to search the house. They didn't expect me to be under their bed, and I kind of wedged myself within these other things. And at this point, my parents were living on a different floor, so my room was upstairs and they were downstairs. So I had kind of like wedged myself in this little space, and they were about to call the cops. And finally I woke up in the late morning. That was very odd. And my mom just says that she would see me sleepwalking, or she would hear things and then get up and just see me walking about the house and try to direct me back to bed. My sister would actually sleep talk. I wouldn't sleep talk and she wouldn't sleepwalk, but she would sleep talk, and she would speak to, sorry, I hear some construction. She would speak to like a presence. It would seem like she would sit up and have a conversation, but you could then intervene and speak to her. And sometimes she wouldn't be speaking in what sounded like a real language or English. And if you were to talk to her, she would look to you and respond. If she wasn't speaking in like English or a coherent way, she would respond to you very just, like, give me a second. But sometimes she'd be laughing. She'd be having a very interesting conversation with whatever this thing was. She would often be looking to the window actually when it was happening. And I saw that, or I woke up and encountered that a few times, and I would try to get her to go back to sleep. You could sometimes talk her to kind of coerce her to go back to sleep and get her out of the conversation. So that was really interesting. What are a few others that I'm trying to recall from that time? There was just a lot going on in that house that I remember. I'm sure there's plenty that I don't. But after I left that house, for the most part, those things stopped happening. I had one interesting experience in the following house, which made me think, oh, this bug. Oh, sorry, bug. Just trying to not get attacked. And I also have my tarot deck on the table, so I don't want it to wind up in the cards or in the box. I actually broke out Tarot of the She. It recently came out of hibernation for me, so I was having some fun with it and pulling cards outside, and got inspired to speak on more paranormal experiences. But what else happened in that house? I would have dreams. This is not necessarily connected to this house. This is something that happened even after I lived in this home, but of course this was my first home, so it started here, and I had more of these as a child. But I would have these dreams where I didn't have a body. These to me were not just like the kind of dream that you have a strange thing happening in your dream and it's an interesting experience, but in these dreams I wouldn't have a body. There would be nothing physical. I wouldn't have sight, sound, touch, taste, and I know that sounds very strange. I don't really know how to describe it. I guess I'll try to put it in more like physical terms, but in the dreams I didn't have any of those things. I was a disembodied sort of entity. I was sentient, but the space I was in was very different, and there were other, I guess, entities that were very similar. So it was almost like drifting through a vacuum, and you were maybe this like cloud sort of thing or entity, and when you started to encounter another, depending on how close you got, you would kind of pick up on their energy, and some were pleasant and some were really unpleasant, and the feeling that you would get, I guess that's the way you would maybe communicate in this space or interact. There would be these super visceral feelings, and I don't know how to describe them in terms of the body. I guess some of them felt really tense or painful. Some were pleasant. Some were just kind of like, I don't really know how to put it, but I would have a lot of these types of dreams, and I would wake up from them in like a sweat and just feeling super drained. And I would wake up multiple times, usually throughout that night, but every time I went back to sleep, it was pretty much a guarantee that I would return to that space or return to that type of thing. So these dreams would usually last, or I would have like a night where that would happen, and even if I woke up and went back to sleep, it would continue. And yeah, I would wake up multiple times just feeling like out of breath, or I would just be in like a cold sweat or something like that, and my teeth would be clenched. And I had those a bunch as a child. I had them less so as I got older. I think the last one I can remember having was maybe like a year or two ago. So it's not that they are gone, but they are less frequent. Something about them is just very interesting to me, so I don't hate them or I don't dislike them, but sometimes they're pleasant and sometimes they're not, or sometimes it's a mixed bag. So that's really interesting. Yeah, and I would say that in a lot of dreams I have had paranormal experiences that I believe happened in the dream, and those still happen to this day. I would say they're more prevalent in that way currently, where this is going to sound, well, all of this sounds really weird, and the fact that I'm recording this, I'm not sure if I'm going to post it, but I thought it would be fun because I love listening to these, and sometimes I'll seek out videos where others share their paranormal experiences, or I always watch those, like, what is it, Paranormal Witness. They have like a Netflix show where it's kind of meant to be documentary style, and then there's the reenactments. I enjoy watching those a lot with my mom and sister, and I will always watch those. So why not share my own? And of course, like I said, I question myself all the time. I am a skeptic, and I'll always say that I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts or like an afterlife, and then I will then share these stories or memories, I guess, that I have, and I guess in some ways it seems like a contradiction, and I'm okay with that contradiction. There are plenty of, I don't know, I'm okay with the contradiction. But in my dreams, I was speaking to my dreams, so I have a lot of dreams where, and usually these turn toward the negative. I actually have one positive, or a few positive dreams where I've seen my late grandmother, who I knew when I was very young, but she died when I was still very young. And I've had a few dreams where I was with her on the beach or at her apartment. She lived right on an apartment that was overlooking the beach. Her balcony was right above the sand, and we would often be at the beach, and that's, I guess, the few memories I do have with her are from those times and those places. So I have had a few memories, especially when I was young, just playing with her on the beach, and I could tell that she wasn't alive, and she would just give me very reassuring messages. Sometimes we wouldn't talk at all, and she would just smile, and we would play with like a beach ball or just have a nice beach day or sit for a while, and it just felt peaceful. And so in many ways I think that that was her way of just kind of showing herself or being a force that was really just helpful and pleasant and protective of me. And even as a child, not that long after she died, I was only 2 years old, and a couple months had passed, and my aunt went to visit somebody who lived in the same building who she knew, and all of a sudden I just wasn't with her. She didn't know where I went. It's not like she left me somewhere for any period of time. She just kind of was like walking with me, and then all of a sudden I wasn't there. And they found me, I guess it was maybe like 30 minutes later or an hour later, and I'd somehow made my way up all the floors and found my grandmother's room. And then when they asked me, I said that Grandma brought me up. So there's that. But going back to those dreams that I do still have on occasion that are generally not the most pleasant, I will be having what seems like a normal dream where things are just happening. Maybe I'm at a house, or just dreams. They're random. They don't necessarily make sense all the time. So the dream will proceed as dreams do, but then something will feel off in the dream, and I'll feel like there's somebody there that shouldn't be, or a presence that is foreign to what I know my dream to be, at least. And for a little bit, it's almost like a finding the thing game. So it's usually like a character, or they're hiding somewhere within it, and usually it's because the dream is stressful, or they're there and it's creating sort of a presence that I don't want, or they're trying to maybe exude some influence on the dream. And it's not necessarily negative, but I do feel like there's something that's a little bit more trickster-like or misguided about when these types of situations happen. And sometimes I'll know pretty quickly what the thing is, but I want to go about, I guess, confronting the entity or the presence in a way that I think is best, or I want to catch them off guard. And sometimes it's almost difficult physically within the dream to kind of call them out or say something, but I usually want to just make it known that I know that they're there, and maybe they're not welcome, or kind of curtail the dream so that it's mine, so that I know that I'm the one that, is in control of what's going on. And usually that makes things kind of weird in the dream, and I'm almost like fighting to move. Like I can't move very well. I just start to feel like this sense of weirdness. And then in many occasions sometimes they laugh, sometimes it's kind of like this weird thing and they disappear. I've had times where it's more of like an attack, or a dream where the only point is that I kind of just get like assaulted or accosted by this entity or presence. For a while that did happen. For the better part of a year, that would happen very often, and I would spend a lot of the dream fighting what it was, and it would be trying to like pin me down, and I would just have to be like hitting it. And honestly, I do think that me kind of like fighting back was what then starts to like end those dreams, or ended that one cycle where I was experiencing what seemed like the same thing for a year. I kind of, I guess, got the upper hand and got it away, got it out. There are times when they're just completely neutral, these types of like dream things, but for the most part I don't have any super positive experiences from that dream space aside from my grandmother. If anything, they're neutral. I don't tend to that bird got really close. I don't tend to experience ones that are super positive in that way. But that's also, I think, partially my reaction and my feeling toward the experience, towards the entity, towards the presence, I think does impact how it all plays out. So there's that also. I'm trying to think if there's been anything else. There's definitely been some strange times that have happened just throughout my life, but those were some, I think, that came to mind, or things that happened to me more often. So yeah, I would say in present times, I tend to have a lot more in my dream life where things like that will happen, and then those types of dreams where I don't have a body really. And then sometimes I just get weird feelings, I would say, but everybody, I think, gets that. I'm trying to think if there's anything super specific that happened that was odd. Well, in that house when I was young, once my sister and I were playing. There was a person doing some work on the house, and my mom was just showing them downstairs what to do. And my sister and I were playing upstairs, and then we were playing in my room, and the door shut and it locked. and the lights turned off and they wouldn't turn back on, and the door wouldn't unlock, and it does lock from the inside. So it locked on the side that we were on and it wouldn't unlock, the lights wouldn't turn on, and we were kind of just like, we thought something bad obviously was going to happen, and we just started banging on the door for a while, but my mom was another floor away, so she just didn't hear us for a while. And then eventually she came upstairs and she was looking for us, and then she went to open my door and it opened for her, so it clearly wasn't locked anymore. And then she just kind of found me and my sister laying by the door. I guess we gotten really tired, and I forget how long we were even in there actually. So there was that as well. And aside from that, I think that there was one when we went to the house following that, where I felt like some presence from the house attempted to follow. And that was really just this door handle just opening, like turning, watching it turn, and then the door opening on its own, which then of course made me very scared of that. This happened in the basement. The basement had 2 rooms, and that happened in the basement, and my sister was there for that one, and that of course freaked us out about that basement. But in that house, the second house that we lived in as kids up until we were decently older, in that house, the former owner had passed away, not in the house, but they, I believe, had cancer and were kind of on the decline, and had sort of an in-care type person for the last few years, and then passed away at a hospital. And then immediately following that, we moved into the house, and I think there were like a few odd experiences in the house, but those didn't feel at all negative. They just kind of felt like, little things here and there. And I guess me, my sister, and my mom kind of ascribed it to potentially being the former owner in that way. But they all felt very kind of just like beneficent and kind, and there wasn't anything that was super bad about that. So yeah, that was really interesting. And then I guess the place that I live in now, nothing has ever really happened. And well, my sister and my mom did see a sort of, I guess, like shadowy figure once. They both saw the shadowy figure, didn't tell each other for a while, and it happened inside the same week, and then nothing happened after. So we lived in this house for 2 years, nothing happened. They saw like a shadowy figure within the same week, and then a couple weeks later they told each other the stories, they communicated the stories, and nothing happened after. And it's been well over a year since, and nothing has happened since. So we think that was maybe something passing through, or they think. I wasn't there for that. I actually was away the sort of like week to weekend time when that happened, but very interesting to have heard, to see what they experienced in that way. But I guess that sums up the paranormal experiences that come to mind, just the ones that I can think of right now. I would love to know some others from people in the community, whether you're in the tarot community, the witchy community. If you come across this video, use the hashtag and maybe say something down below. If you don't want to make a response, you can maybe put a little comment about some of your experiences and let me know what your belief systems are. So maybe this is something that really factors into what you believe, or if you work with ancestors, or if it's part of your culture. I'd be very curious. I'm, of course, like I said, a bit of a skeptic, despite the fact that I do remember these sorts of encounters or things having happened to myself. I still sometimes question if they were real, or if these things did actually happen to me. But I hope you are all well. Like and subscribe if this was fun or interesting, and if you would maybe want another video like this, if I can drum up. I know that there are some other things that have happened to me, so maybe there's a part 2 or a second installment to this somewhere in the future if that's of interest. But until next time, bye.